everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is Gordon Chang, a political commentator and author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America. Gordon, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Brittany.
In the last year since President Trump has been back in office, trade tensions between the U.S. and nations around the world have really reached a boiling point. Trump's tariffs are one of the reasons why we've seen leaders of traditional U.S. allies like the U.K., Canada, and France make visits to China in recent months to attempt to reset relations. And I want to talk about where those relationships stand in a bit. But before we do, there has been a major development on the tariff front. Happened today. The Supreme Court ruled that President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs are unlawful. And after that ruling, you posted this: China's regime, after the Supreme Court tariff decision, must be breaking out the champagne. Talk to us about that.
Xi Jinping's only realistic plan to rescue the Chinese economy is to export more, because he's turned his back on consumption. Now, almost every analyst, economist, observer has said that China needs to have a consumption-based economy to have a sustainable one. But Xi Jinping doesn't believe that. And you can see the numbers. Consumption accounts for something like, 38, 39% of China's GDP. That number has actually gone down in recent years. And Xi Jinping has put much more emphasis on production, on factory production, which means because China can't absorb all that production, it has to export more. And with the president's tariffs now declared unconstitutional, at least those under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, China now has perhaps greater access to the American market. So that's the reason why they're breaking out the champagne. They now have better into the American market. And by the way, Brittany, we account for something like 34% of global consumption. Everybody needs the U.S. market.
The IEEPA tariffs, as you said, that is such a large swath of the tariffs that have been found unconstitutional. I'm curious what you think this does to trade negotiations with China. If China's popping out the champagne right now, they're celebrating, do they have more leverage at the negotiating table with the United States when it comes to trade?
I think that they do. Now, President Trump has other legislative authority under which he can impose tariffs. But the Emergency Act of 1977, IEEPA, clearly was the main tool that he used. So yes, I'm sure they're very happy at this point.
And President Trump is visiting China at the end of next month and into April. How do you think this decision impacts those talks?
I think it puts Trump in a much weaker position than he otherwise would have been. And I don't think he should go anyway for a number of reasons. But now, unless he can figure out a way to reimpose tariffs on China, I think that he should stay away. He should stay away until he has been able to repair his bargaining position.
Over the past couple of weeks and months, we have seen leaders of traditional U.S. allies like China, the U.K., France, amongst others, try to defrost their relationships with China. And part of the reason we are seeing this reportedly is because of President Trump's tariffs, his comments on NATO allies, and his desire to acquire Greenland. Does this concern you?
I've been very concerned about, you had Emmanuel Macron in December. You had Keir Starmer of England or Great Britain in January, Friedrich Merz, Germany this month. The list goes on. And of course, Carney, Canada. So yes, we've got to be very concerned that our closest allies are trying to develop closer economic relations with Beijing. And Carney, when he was in Beijing, talked about a strategic partnership. This is a country, Canada, which controls our long northern undefended border. So yes, China's been very influential in Ottawa in the Justin Trudeau years. It very well may become more influential. That's a real national security risk to the United States.
And if President Trump and the Trump administration, they're seeing this, how do you think they should be responding? What should that really look like?
Well, there are a number of things that need to be done. So for instance, with regard to Canada, we have some serious national security concerns with Canada, which have been left unaddressed for a very long time. It was good for President Trump to address them, But now he needs to repair relations with Ottawa because it is in our interest, as well as in Canada's interest, to make sure that we have a durable bond. And again, I believe it's important for President Trump to do the same things with other countries. Yes, Greenland is important to American security, but Canada is even more important to the United States. So these are things that I think that we need to keep in perspective. China is, I believe, an enemy. That's what they call us. We should be thinking about that in the same terms. But, NATO countries are not our enemies, and we shouldn't be treating them as enemies, as sometimes Trump has done. So it's important for us to make sure that we treat our friends well and our enemies poorly.
After the Supreme Court's tariff decision became public on Friday morning, President Trump, he expressed that he is not happy about it. Friday afternoon, he had a press conference, and here he announced that he's going to impose a 10% global tariff. Are you concerned that this has the potential to push our allies even further into the arms of China?
I think that it will. When you have it's not just the question of tariffs, it's the way they're imposed. And I don't think President Trump helped himself with apparently haphazard and arbitrary imposition of tariffs, where he would impose them one day, he says, and then a couple days later, he would take them down. And imposing tariffs on penguins is just not a good look for the United States. So I think that we need to have a trade policy which looks to be well thought out and implemented clearly, and we haven't had that. And so this is going to be, I think, very difficult for Trump because Trump has a negotiating style, but that style, I think, hurt him at the Supreme Court.
And as I said earlier, President Trump is going to China. He's going there end of March, beginning of April. What are you specifically looking out for in that meeting? If you could advise President Trump, what would you say to him?
First of all, don't go. For a lot of reasons. President Trump can't go to Keir Starmer and say it's dangerous for the UK to have trade relations with China when President Trump is trying to establish better trade relations with China. That just does not work. So I think it's important for President Trump to set the tone. The other thing, of course, is that by Trump going to Beijing, he is showing himself, in the Chinese eyes at least, to be a vassal. That's what vassals do. They go to the Chinese Grand Celestial Court and they show their submission. Now, I'm sure Trump doesn't view it that way, but that's not important. What's important is what the Chinese think. And the reason is because that's the way that's going to determine the way they act. So I think that it's important for Xi Jinping to come to the United States first, and these optics matter. We are Americans, so we don't think symbolism is important. But in insecure regimes like Beijing, symbolism is almost everything. And so we've got to start to think like the way the Chinese think.
And what exactly is that symbolism? If you're in Beijing, you see the president of the United States coming over after he's had tough talk about China. I mean, what does that look like to you?
It looks like Trump recognizes that he is in an inferior bargaining position to China. It looks like he's a vassal. That's the way Chinese have thought for hundreds of years. This is not just communists. This is Chinese foreign policy or Chinese attitudes towards foreigners. And so we have to look at it the way they do. I think Xi Jinping is going to be tougher to deal with after Trump goes to Beijing. And that's not good for us.
What do you think that will really look like after? How will he be tougher to deal with?
I think, for instance, he will not honor his promises on exports of rare earths to the United States. They can slow walk that process. They can slow walk the buying of soybeans, things that are important to President Trump. They'll continue to engage in predatory trade practices. This is just not good for us.
And this all comes as we saw Jimmy Lai sentenced to 20 years under China's national security law earlier this month. And Jimmy Lai, as we know, he's a former Hong Kong pro-democracy media tycoon. And this sentence has essentially been called a de facto life sentence because he is in his late 70s. He is experiencing health issues. And you posted on X that China freeing Jimmy Lai should be a precondition for Trump meeting Xi Jinping. Talk to us about it.
Jimmy Lai is a hero. I think the Chinese actually want to release him because they don't want him to die in prison. He's 78, he's got diabetes, he's in poor health, and they don't want to make him even more of a martyr. So I think this is a perfect opportunity for President Trump to say, release Jimmy Lai or I'm not coming. We need to show the Chinese that we believe in our positions. And if Trump sticks to his guns, I think it will be better for us in the long term. We don't think human rights are that important in our discussions with China, but the Chinese do. And so we need to view their perspective. If we're tough on human rights, I think we'll do better on the other things that we have the other matters that we have to deal with on China. Human rights is really important to them, so it's really important to us.
From China's perspective, then, would they, if President Trump said, I'm not coming unless you release them, or release Jimmy Lai rather, would they do that as a sign of good faith, or would they think that that would appear weak?
I think that they would think it appears weak on their part. So they might not do it. But the point is, we shouldn't be talking to China right now for a lot of reasons. I think that it's not in our interest. Trump is making a lot of concessions to the Chinese, which are really important in order to get that meeting. Remember Keir Starmer. The Chinese told him if he did not green light the mega embassy, that he would not get permission to go to Beijing. Well, Keir Starmer, he green lighted the embassy, and he got very little during his trip to Beijing. Matter of fact, they humiliated him in a number of different ways. Same thing with Trump. Trump right now is not imposing, his Commerce Department is not imposing absolutely needed prohibitions on transfers of software and other things to China. And also, we're not prohibiting the installation of Chinese-made equipment in data centers. These are things that are, I think, critical. And we're not doing those things because Trump wants to have this meeting in Beijing. So from my perspective, if we don't have that incentive, we're going to protect ourselves. And that means we're going to be in a much better position in the competition with China.
Why do you think then the Trump administration is making these concessions? What does that do for us?
I think you have to talk to the president about that. I can't read his mind. I can guess, like everybody else guesses. Everyone has said, and this is based upon reports from insiders, that Trump has gone soft on China because he wants to go to Beijing. He wants the pomp and all the circumstance. And I don't know. But the point is, I can see that the administration is not enacting and imposing restrictions and prohibitions that are absolutely in our national security interest. We cannot, for instance, allow the Chinese to steal data from data centers or to be able to even control those data centers because of the installation of Chinese equipment. That's just so elemental. And I can't understand why the Commerce Department won't impose that prohibition. But, they won't do it. And it's in the run-up to President Trump's visit to Beijing. So put two and two together.
So you're saying it's a good day for China. Beijing is popping champagne right now over this ruling. So specifically, what are you looking out for next between now and President Trump's visit?
President Trump has other statutory authority that he can use to impose tariffs. But I probably will take some time in order to do that. So you got 301 tariffs, for instance. I'd like to see how fast he does that. I'd like to see what he does with other technology decisions that are, coming up. And, in general, I'd like to see other things that he's doing. The interesting thing, Brittany, is that if you look at the substance of Trump's external policies, many of them are directed at China to undermine China's interests around the world. And that's very good. But when you look at some of the things that Trump says, these Xi Jinping is my friend, we had an excellent discussion. These are things which are really awful because they give signals to our friends and allies to do things which are not in our interest. So for instance, Carney saying, I've got a strategic partnership with Beijing. We need to look at the substance as well as the symbolism as well as the substance.
And so then would you think if President Trump brings down the temperature with our allies, that will ultimately hurt China?
Ultimately, yes, because the stronger relations we have with our allies, the more that we have a united front, I think that it means China will then interact with us in at least a more constructive basis. I'm not saying they'll ever be constructive, but at least they won't be as belligerent and hostile and provocative as they have been. They take their cues from us, and if they think they can divide the Atlantic Alliance, for instance, or if they think that they can separate us from our other partners, they're going to be much more belligerent and aggressive.
Gordon Chang, I always appreciate your perspective here. Thank you so much for the conversation. You are welcome back anytime.
Thank you so much, Brittany. I really appreciate it.